Karen had always been fascinated by the pomp and pageantry of British culture, and nothing symbolized that more than the iconic Royal Guards. Known for their striking red uniforms and unflinching discipline, they were a must-see on her London itinerary. Today was special. It was the day she would finally witness the famous changing of the guard ceremony at Buckingham Palace. From the moment she stepped out of her hotel, the excitement was palpable. The streets of London buzzed with the energy of tourists and city dwellers alike, but Karen's mind was fixed on one thing: seeing those guards in action. She had heard stories of their stoic nature, how they stood motionless for hours, impervious to the bustling crowds and incessant flashes of cameras. This intrigued Karen to no end, and she wondered if it was all as dramatic as people said. As she made her way through the crowded streets, Karen's thoughts drifted to the history of the Guards, a tradition steeped in centuries of British history. She imagined the countless ceremonies these guards had performed, a symbol of continuity and discipline in a rapidly changing world. Her heart swelled with anticipation. It wasn't just a tourist attraction for her. It was a chance to touch a piece of living history. Navigating through the bustling London traffic, Karen finally arrived at the gates of Buckingham Palace. The area was already crowded with people from all corners of the globe, each person craning their necks for a better view, cameras ready. The atmosphere was electric, a communal sense of waiting for something grand to unfold. Karen squeezed through the crowd, securing a spot with a clear view of the palace gates. She looked around, taking in the faces of her fellow spectators, their expressions mirroring her own excitement. Children perched on their parents' shoulders, couples holding hands, seasoned travelers with binoculars. All were here for the same reason. Karen felt a connection to these strangers, united by their shared anticipation. As the clock ticked closer to the hour, the crowd's murmur grew to a buzz. Karen checked her camera, ensuring it was ready to capture the moment. She had read about the precision of the ceremony, how each movement was a testament to the discipline and precision of the Royal Guards. She couldn't believe she was finally here, about to witness a tradition that had enchanted her from afar for so long. The sense of history, the continuity of tradition, and the sheer spectacle of the ceremony filled her with an exhilarating mix of awe and reverence. This was the kind of moment that travelers remember forever, and Karen was ready to soak in every second. Karen watched in awe as the Royal Guards began their march, their red coats vivid against the gray cobblestones, and their black hats nearly brushing the low-hanging branches of the old trees lining the path. She had always been drawn to their discipline and the air of mystery that seemed to surround them. The guards' expressions were unreadable, their eyes fixed straight ahead, never wandering to meet the gaze of the onlookers. It was as if they were part of a different world, one where the chatter and laughter of the crowd were mere whispers, irrelevant and distant. Curiosity got the better of Karen. She couldn't resist the urge to interact with them. Despite several signs and the common knowledge that the guards were not to be obstructed or distracted, Karen's adventurous spirit nudged her forward. She stepped closer to the path of the marching guards, her heart racing with excitement and a bit of mischief. She waved and called out gently, trying to capture their attention, but the guards continued their march, unseeing and unhearing, their steps in perfect synchronization. The crowd around her began to notice her efforts. Some chuckled under their breath, entertained by her boldness. Others shook their heads, disapproving of her disregard for protocol. But Karen was undeterred. She was determined to make this visit memorable, to do something that she could tell stories about back home. Her attempts grew bolder. She clapped loudly and cheered, her voice joining the chorus of other tourists, snapping pictures and commenting on the guards' unwavering focus. But no matter what she did, the guards marched on, their faces set in stone, their bodies rigid with discipline. It was a game to Karen now, a challenge between her lively, spirited nature and their legendary stoicism. As Karen's antics continued, the initial amusement of the crowd began to wane. Some tourists started to film her, their smartphones capturing every failed attempt to elicit a reaction from the guards. Whispers spread through the crowd, a mix of admiration for her audacity and criticism for her lack of respect. Karen felt a thrill at being the center of attention, but also a nagging voice at the back of her mind questioning if she was going too far. She paused, stepping back to watch the guards continue their march, untouched by her efforts. It was then that Karen began to understand the depth of commitment these guards had to their roles. They weren't just soldiers, they were custodians of a centuries-old tradition, embodying the discipline and stoicism that had been passed down through generations. Her respect for them deepened, and a sense of embarrassment crept in as she realized that her actions might have seemed disrespectful to what was a solemn and prestigious duty. This realization calmed her restless spirit, and she decided to watch the rest of the ceremony in silence, appreciating the precision and dedication of the guards. The rest of the crowd settled down as well, and together they watched as the ceremony continued, a seamless dance of history and discipline unfolding before their eyes. Karen knew that this experience would stay with her, a reminder of the day she tried to bridge the gap between her world and the world of the Royal Guards. Karen stood among the crowd, her heart still racing from the excitement of trying to get the guards' attention. Even though they had ignored her completely, a part of her still felt challenged. Were they really that disciplined, or was there a way to break through their unshakable focus? The thought lingered in her mind, and before she knew it, she found herself stepping forward again. She wasn't trying to be rude, at least not intentionally. It was just curiosity. She wanted to see if anything could make them react. Karen had seen videos online where people tried all sorts of tricks. Funny faces, jokes, even dancing, but nothing ever seemed to work. It was almost unbelievable. Surely they were still human, right? Maybe they weren't allowed to talk, but what if she stood directly in front of them? What would happen then? The idea took root in her mind, and before she could stop herself, she was already moving. The path where the guards marched was clearly marked, a straight line that no one was supposed to cross. Yet, Karen, feeling adventurous, took a step closer, then another. The people around her began to notice, murmuring among themselves. Some pulled out their phones, sensing that something interesting was about to happen. Karen positioned herself directly in their path. The heavy sound of their boots striking the pavement echoed in the air, growing louder as they marched closer. She could see the unwavering expressions on their faces, their focus locked ahead. There was no hesitation in their steps, no sign that they even saw her. A tingle of nervous excitement ran through her. Would they stop? Would they say something? She braced herself, half expecting a stern warning. But as the guards neared, they showed no signs of slowing down. Their rhythm remained unchanged, and suddenly, Karen felt the weight of the moment. The realization hit her all at once. These were trained soldiers, not performers in a street act. They weren't here to entertain tourists. They were here to uphold tradition and duty, and she was directly in their way. The murmurs in the crowd turned to gasps as the guards continued forward, their towering figures just inches away. Karen panicked. Instinct took over, and at the very last second, she stumbled to the side, barely avoiding contact. The guards passed her as if she didn't exist, their movements perfectly aligned, their eyes never breaking focus. A wave of embarrassment washed over her. She had thought it would be a fun challenge, but now she felt foolish. The onlookers whispered among themselves, some laughing, others shaking their heads. Karen's cheeks burned as she quickly stepped back into the crowd. She had wanted to test the discipline of the Royal Guards, but in the end, it was she who had been tested. And the answer was clear. Nothing could break their focus. Not even her. Karen's heart pounded in her chest as she stepped back into the crowd, her face burning with embarrassment. She had been so sure that the guards would react, that they would at least hesitate or give her a warning. But they didn't. They moved past her as if she was invisible, their expressions unchanging, their movements precise and unwavering. It was as if she had never even been there. The people around her had mixed reactions. Some laughed, shaking their heads as if they had expected this outcome all along. Others looked at her with disapproval, whispering to each other about how she had ignored the rules. A few had recorded the entire thing on their phones, and Karen had no doubt that those videos would soon make their way to social media. The thought made her stomach tighten. What had she been thinking? For the first time that day, she felt truly out of place. Up until now, she had been caught up in the excitement, the thrill of testing the limits of the guards' discipline. But standing there now, with people staring at her and the guards marching away without a second thought, she felt small. She had underestimated the seriousness of their duty. She took a deep breath, trying to shake off the awkwardness. Maybe she could still enjoy the rest of the ceremony, watch from the sidelines like everyone else. But just as she was about to step back, something unexpected happened. One of the palace officials, a stern-looking man in a dark uniform, approached her. His expression was calm, but there was an air of authority around him. The crowd quieted slightly, their eyes shifting between Karen and the official. "Miss," he said in a firm but polite tone, "for your own safety, please do not obstruct the guards again." Karen swallowed hard. She felt the weight of his words. It wasn't just about rules or tradition. It was about respect. The guards weren't just standing there for show. They had a job to do, a duty that had been upheld for generations. And she had almost disrupted that. I understand," she mumbled, nodding quickly. "I didn't mean any harm." The official gave her a small nod before turning and walking away, blending back into the background of the ceremony. Karen let out a breath she didn't realize she had been holding. Looking around, she saw that the ceremony was continuing as if nothing had happened. The guards carried on, their movements perfectly synchronized, their expressions unreadable. The moment had passed, and she was just another face in the crowd again. Karen felt a mix of relief and regret. She hadn't meant to be disrespectful, but she now understood how important this tradition was. Maybe she had learned something valuable today. With a deep breath, she stepped back, determined to watch the rest of the ceremony, not as someone trying to get attention, but as someone who truly appreciated the history and dedication behind it. Karen stood quietly among the crowd, her mind replaying the moments when she had tried to get the guards to stop. The official's words echoed in her head. "For your own safety, please do not obstruct the guards again." She had never expected the situation to turn out like this, and she was still processing what had happened. The initial rush of excitement had quickly turned into a wave of regret. What had she been thinking? She glanced around, noticing the reactions of the other people in the crowd. Some were still watching her, but most had returned their attention to the ceremony. Karen felt like an outsider, someone who had momentarily disrupted the smooth flow of something so carefully orchestrated. The guards continued their march, unaffected by the small incident, and the ceremony moved forward with perfect precision. It struck Karen, then, how serious the whole thing was. These guards weren't just part of a tourist attraction. They were guardians of a tradition that had been in place for hundreds of years. The people around her had gathered not to see a performance, but to witness something that held deep significance for the British people, and she had tried to interfere with that. Her stomach twisted in discomfort. She had always prided herself on being the curious and adventurous person, willing to push boundaries and explore the unknown. But in that moment, she realized that some things didn't need to be tested. The guards were doing their job, and their focus was unbreakable. She couldn't help but feel a twinge of embarrassment for her earlier actions. What had seemed like a harmless attempt to get their attention had ended up as a distraction, something that had pulled her out of the experience rather than deepening it. Karen's eyes wandered over the guards again, watching how they moved in perfect synchrony. Their uniforms gleamed brightly in the sunlight, their expressions as calm and steady as ever. There was a sense of pride in their movements, a feeling of dedication that Karen couldn't ignore. The way they stood so tall, unwavering in the face of crowds, was a testament to their discipline. She realized then that there was a beauty in their stillness, in their quiet strength. It was something she hadn't fully appreciated until now. The ceremony continued, and Karen shifted her focus. Instead of feeling like an outsider, she decided to immerse herself in the moment. She wasn't going to try to get attention anymore or test the guards' limits. She would just watch, appreciate, and learn. As the ceremony went on, Karen found herself fascinated by the precision of the guards' movements. Every step was measured, every motion deliberate. The way they held their weapons, the way they clicked their heels in unison. It was all part of something bigger than herself. She felt a sense of respect growing inside her, replacing the discomfort she had initially felt. This wasn't just a ceremony. It was a living piece of history, one that she was lucky enough to witness. By the time the ceremony concluded, Karen's perspective had shifted completely. She no longer saw the royal guards as simply statues standing in place for tourists to admire. They were symbols of something greater, a tradition that had been carefully preserved through time. She stood there in awe, humbled by the experience, and made a quiet promise to herself. From now on, she would approach such moments with more reverence, understanding that some things were meant to be respected from a distance, without interruption. The following days after the incident, Karen couldn't help but think about what had happened during her visit to Buckingham Palace. Her mind often drifted back to the moment when she had tried to get the royal guards to react, only to be met with complete indifference. That initial embarrassment had given way to a sense of understanding, but now there was something else. Curiosity. What had drawn her to make such an impulsive decision? Why had she felt the need to challenge something so ancient and deeply rooted in tradition? It wasn't just the guards or the ceremony itself that lingered in her thoughts. It was the way people had reacted. The video clips of her attempts to interact with the guards had quickly made their way online, and Karen knew her face was now part of countless social media posts. Some of the comments were lighthearted, even funny. People laughed at her boldness, and others marveled at how fearless she had been in the face of such rigid discipline. But not everyone was kind. Some comments felt like judgment, with people questioning her motives and condemning her actions as disrespectful. Karen knew she had made a mistake, but what troubled her more than the public attention was the disappointment she felt within herself. She had always prided herself on being someone who could learn and grow from her experiences, but in this case, she felt as though she had failed. She had made a spectacle of herself, and in doing so, she had disrespected something much larger than herself. She began to reflect on the significance of the guards and the ceremony. She had always appreciated history, but it wasn't until now that she realized the depth of tradition that existed in places like Buckingham Palace. The royal guards weren't just soldiers. They were part of the fabric that held together the past, present, and future of a nation. Their role wasn't to entertain tourists. It was to uphold a duty that had been passed down for generations. And Karen, in her moment of curiosity, had interrupted that sacred ritual. After some time, she made the decision to learn more about what she had witnessed. She began reading about the history of the British Royal Guards, their origins, and the significance of the changing of the guard ceremony. The more she learned, the more she realized how little she had understood before. It wasn't just a colorful parade. It was a symbol of British pride, tradition, and respect. It was a living link to history, and she had almost ruined it with her thoughtless actions. Karen also took the time to watch interviews with military experts and historians, learning about the strict training that the guards underwent to maintain their composure and precision. She came to understand that their stoicism wasn't a mere act. It was the result of years of discipline, practice, and sacrifice. The more she delved into the story of the guards, the more she felt an intense respect for their role in British society. As she came to terms with her actions, Karen realized she wanted to make things right. She didn't want to be remembered for the awkward tourist who tried to challenge the guards. Instead, she wanted to be someone who had learned from her mistakes and grown. With a new understanding of the tradition she had once underestimated, Karen posted a video online, apologizing for her behavior and expressing her newfound respect for the royal guards. She hoped that by sharing her experience, others might also gain a deeper appreciation for the importance of cultural traditions and the people who uphold them. Although the incident had made her feel like an outsider at first, Karen was determined to turn it into a valuable learning experience. It was a moment of personal growth, and it made her more aware of the importance of understanding and respecting the world around her. She wasn't perfect, but she knew that she had taken the first step toward becoming someone who appreciated history and culture on a deeper level. Karen's journey of reflection continued as she thought more about the lessons she had learned. After sharing her apology online, she found that many people were understanding and appreciative of her honesty. Some even shared their own experiences, reminding her that everyone makes mistakes, but what truly matters is the willingness to learn and grow from them. Karen was grateful for the support she received, but the process of self-discovery didn't stop there. She was determined to make sure this experience would help her become more mindful in the future. As days passed, Karen started to look for ways to deepen her knowledge about the cultures she was visiting. She realized that, while traveling, it wasn't enough to just see the sights and take pictures. It was about understanding the significance behind what she was witnessing. That would be the key to truly connecting with the places and people she encountered. One evening, as she sat in a quiet cafe, sipping on a warm cup of tea, Karen made a decision. She wanted to visit more places where traditions and rituals were respected and upheld. But this time, she would approach them with a fresh perspective, one of respect and understanding, rather than simply as a tourist. She knew that true appreciation came from taking the time to learn the stories and values behind the customs she encountered. Inspired by this new mindset, Karen began to research other cultural traditions around the world. She discovered how certain festivals were celebrated with great reverence, how ancient rituals had been passed down through generations, and how each culture had its unique way of honoring the past. The more she learned, the more fascinated she became. She was starting to see the world in a different light, one where respect for tradition was as important as curiosity and adventure. She also realized that her experience with the royal guards had opened her eyes to something larger than just her own perspective. It had taught her the importance of patience, humility, and the understanding that some things are sacred and should be respected. It wasn't about standing out or challenging what seemed unfamiliar, but rather about embracing what had been carefully cultivated over time. In the weeks that followed, Karen began to attend cultural workshops, read books on history and tradition, and engage in conversations with locals during her travels. She noticed how the more she connected with the stories of others, the more enriched her own life became. Each new experience, whether it was learning about a local festival or participating in a community event, helped her grow as a person and broadened her worldview. She also began to share her experiences with her online followers, telling them not just about the places she visited, but also about the lessons she had learned along the way. Her story about the royal guards became a key part of her narrative, and she used it as an example of how sometimes a single mistake could lead to a profound change in perspective. Karen's travels from that point forward were no longer about rushing through the sights or collecting souvenirs. They were about understanding the deeper meaning behind each destination. She felt more connected to the world around her, and the sense of respect she had gained gave her a newfound appreciation for every culture she encountered. The incident with the royal guards, which had once been a source of embarrassment, had ultimately become a turning point in her life. It had sparked a desire to approach the world with more respect, understanding, and curiosity, qualities that would guide her on all her future adventures. As time passed, Karen began to notice subtle changes in the way she approached the world around her. What had started as an embarrassing moment at Buckingham Palace had transformed into a pivotal point in her life, one that shaped how she viewed her travels and the cultures she encountered. Her perspective had broadened, and she no longer saw herself as just a tourist, but as someone who sought to connect with the deeper meaning behind the traditions she experienced. The next time Karen traveled, she chose a destination known for its rich cultural heritage, Kyoto, Japan. She had heard about the beauty of the city's ancient temples, its serene gardens, and the revered tea ceremonies that had been practiced for centuries. But unlike her previous trips, Karen wasn't simply there to snap pictures or check items off a list. This time, she came with a different mindset, one of respect, curiosity, and a genuine desire to understand. She spent her days visiting historical sites, learning about the significance of each temple and its connection to Japanese philosophy. She took part in a traditional tea ceremony, where the graceful movements of the host and the quiet, meditative atmosphere filled her with a sense of peace and reverence. Karen listened intently to the stories behind these traditions, marveling at the wisdom that had been passed down through generations. Each experience deepened her appreciation for the culture, and she felt more connected to the people and the history that had shaped the place. While in Kyoto, Karen also took the time to sit down with locals and engage in thoughtful conversations about their customs. She learned about the importance of respecting nature, the concept of wabi-sabi, and how even the smallest moments could hold great meaning. The more she learned, the more she realized how much there was to appreciate in the world, things that weren't always immediately apparent to the casual observer. One evening, as Karen sat in a peaceful garden, reflecting on her journey, she felt a deep sense of gratitude. Gratitude for the lessons she had learned, for the kindness of the people she had met, and for the growth she had experienced. She thought back to that moment at Buckingham Palace, when she had tried to get the guards to react. That had been the moment she'd started her transformation, and now she saw how far she had come. When Karen returned home, she shared her experiences with her followers, but not just as travel stories. She talked about the importance of respect and understanding, of taking the time to truly immerse oneself in a culture rather than just observing it from a distance. Her followers appreciated her insights, and many commented that her journey had inspired them to approach their own travels with more mindfulness and empathy. Karen's travels from that point forward were no longer just about the places she visited, but about the people she met and the stories they shared. She had learned to listen, to observe, and to understand before acting. Her journey had become less about making a spectacle of herself and more about being a quiet observer, someone who could appreciate the beauty and meaning in the world without feeling the need to challenge it. Looking back, Karen realized that the mistake she had made in London had been a gift in disguise. It had led her to discover a deeper connection with the world, one that was built on respect, curiosity, and an open heart. And as she continued to travel, she carried that lesson with her, knowing that every place she visited held a story waiting to be discovered, a tradition waiting to be respected, and a world ready to be explored with humility and understanding.